Hello, this is a test. Can you hear us? Can you hear this? Testing, 1, 2. You can't hear
It
that?
says presentation will start within 60 seconds. It hasn't started yet.
Oh, that's right. There is a delay with the Hangouts to this, so I know that. All right, testing, 1, 2, test. We're seeing on the bar here for the audio that it's working.
Okay, I'm still showing starting. The presentation will, there it goes. It's working. I can hear you.
Okay. But no one's in, right? I don't see anyone in.
Three admins, no attendees.
This is just us. Test. See, it's Lori's saying it's working. Who's this Lori? Lori's here. So we might have someone on here. Hi, welcome back to the webinar here. We apologize for the technical difficulty here. We had some glitches with our microphone. If you could, if you could let us know if you're hearing us, that'd be great in the chat pane there. That'd be helpful. If you could just type in there, we can hear you. That would be great. So we're just trying to figure this out. We're going to do another replay of this here shortly, but I don't know if that's old. Okay, so Lori, thank you. You can hear us? Okay, we're going to continue here. Okay, great, Casey, thank you. So I think we got 2 people in here. Okay, let's get started then. We're going to go, Casey, if you can send an email out to the others, let us know where we started. That would be great. So we're our presentation here from Washington Christian Academy is about affording a Christian education, and we're glad you're here with us. And we want to kind of go through some material to explain what it means to afford a Christian education for your child. And we think some of the material is going to help you dive deeper into that and make a real educated decision. With that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Washington Christian Academy. We're located here in Olney, Maryland. It's got a beautiful campus, and the Lord's really blessed the school over the past few years as it's grown. You can find out more information about the school on our website at www.washingtonchristian.org. Our presenter today, is David Hawes. My name is Ralph Cochran. I'm the Director of Marketing. I'll be hosting the presentation. And David is Director of Operations here at Washington Christian. He has a lot of experience when it comes to helping families be able to enter the school and process the information that's needed for them to make a best decision for their family budget. So he's going to give you a lot of insights and tips to making the right decision here. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to David. And later on in the presentation, we will probably have some poll questions. But for right now, we're just going to get started. So David, could you just tell me a little about your background and go through what we're going to be talking about here?
Great. Thanks so much, Ralph. So the first thing might be obvious is that, I'm not an expert in running webinars. So I think that's been established at this point. I have been at the Washington Christian Academy for 10 years and have spent that time working in the business office. And a part of that has been working with the tuition assistance and, that process along with families. So I understand things both from the school's perspective, but in its financial position, but I also understand families. At the same time, my wife and I have 5 children, and we have had them at other Christian schools as well as Washington Christian Academy here, over the years. And And so I understand it as a parent in the discussions that we've had about asking the same question that we're going to be talking about today. So that's a little bit about me and who you're going to be hearing from. Me go over our agenda real quick. We're going to talk some about the challenge, and we certainly understand that it is a challenge for families, particularly when there are more than one child that you're looking to put into a Christian school, and one tuition amount is challenging enough, but you add more than that and the challenge just increases. Also, we're going to spend most of the time talking about, then what do families do? How can they afford tuition? We're going to be looking at some of the programs that exist, within Christian schools and their frameworks. We're going to talk a little bit about decisions we've seen families make and things that have helped them through it. I'm going to give you some details specifically about Washington Christian Academy and our financial aid and tuition assistance process. What we do and specific things, related to our parameters and our process. So I'll go over that with you. And then if this is hopefully helped remove a barrier and you've been thinking about Christian education, and then, what are some of the next steps to take depending on where you are in that process. And finally, at the end, we'll have some questions.
Yeah, so one thing I want to do before David jumps in here is just ask you guys a poll question. You're going to see this right in the chat panel there on the side. Do you currently pay tuition for your child or children? So if you could just answer that poll question, that would be helpful for us. And I'm going to start that right now. You'll see that in there. So David, back to you. Go ahead.
All right. So I have a picture of a bridge here for you because this is a part of the way that I think about this and have talked with families about it. We are, picture yourself as a family on one side of either this big body of water. I think this is the San Francisco Bay, and you're trying to get the other side, which is enrolling your child or children in a Christian school. And often, the challenge is the financial part of it. How do you, cross that bridge? How do you get from one side to another? And at times you don't even feel like you can see the other side, much less, put a plan together on how you're going to be able to get to that. The biggest thing I would say, just in thinking about it this way, is that you do not have to build the bridge yourself. If, as you're, looking at school websites and looking at some of the tuition numbers and thinking, how in the world am I going to do that? You're not going to typically have to do that yourself. There are families with resources that are able to do that. If you're not one of them, there are other pieces in place. You don't have to build the whole bridge yourself. Let's talk a little bit more about the challenge that's associated with that. And I wanted to give you at least some perspective from the school side, the financial side, and maybe help answer a question I get frequently is, why does it cost so much? Why is tuition what it is? I think a big reason that's a reaction that we have is, particularly when we're comparing that to the tuition you don't have to pay at public schools. So the comparison value often is a zero, something that maybe we feel like we're getting for free. We know we're not, because we're paying tax dollars and that goes into it. But that's often the comparison point that we make. And private schools, Christian schools, do not receive anything from the government. All of the expenses associated with running the school have to be raised by the school. And in a typical school environment, at least 90% of that is going to come from the tuition. Schools do have fundraising, plans and are able to raise some money toward the expenses they have, but typically the vast majority of that comes from the tuition. The other point I would like to make is that, from the school's business side, the large percentage of that cost, the expense, has to do with the salaries and benefits for the faculty and the staff. And Christian schools want to hire great teachers, great, staff members. Those are going to be the people that are in front of, your children. Those are the ones that are going to be making a difference in their lives. And we want to pay them what they're worth, have laborers worthy of his wages, scripture tells us. And we believe that's true, not just of pastors, but that's true of teachers as well. And we want to be able to cover benefits for them. And as you know, those are becoming more and more expensive. We want heads of household to be able to, be teachers in Christian schools. And the last thing I would say is that, we want to be able to hire professional teachers. So teachers that have invested time and their own money in their education, often continuing education, so that they can be the best educator in that classroom. And we want them to be able to work in Christian schools. We want our education to be on par with any of the other options that, families have, be it public schools or other private schools. And a part of that always is going to primarily come back to the kinds of teachers that we have employed and the ones that we're going to be able to hire. So as you look at that tuition figure, connect it back to the teachers and their salaries, and we think directly the quality of the education that the children at that school are going to receive. Part of the challenge as you are pursuing this, you'll recognize that there's a range of tuitions in different Christian schools and a different set of expenses. Some schools are able to operate out of churches, and that can help some of their expense plans, and different philosophies go in. So even just going to a Christian school, a part of the challenge is they're going to be, different amounts. We certainly recognize part of that challenge has to do with limits that exist in family financial pictures and the resources that, families have. That often as we have families come to the school, we don't expect that they're going to have the resources to be able to necessarily each one through the door to pay, the tuition that we have, and certainly want those families to be able to be there. And then finally, even, beyond that tuition figure number that you see, on the website, as you're working your way through the process, then you might find out, oh, there's this that you need to pay for, or there's something else that pops up that adds to that bridge. You got to build that bridge further than you even thought at the beginning of the process. And that can be difficult and frustrating. So that's another part of the challenge. It's that tuition figure at times isn't, the only dollar figure involved with that. You have to figure out transportation or other fees that schools often have. So that's a part of the challenge. So let's get to and you probably know all that. Those are things you might have looked at and thought about before. So hopefully some of the things that we look at now will be of benefit to you. How can families afford it? How can you build that bridge if, what you're looking at in your own resources, is not going to build that bridge all the way across? Well, the first thing I always tell families is look to the tuition assistance program that schools have. And I've had conversations with families in my neighborhood and, in my church, not even specifically about our school, but private school or other Christian schools in general. They're talking about the tuition number, and I say, well, have you applied for tuition assistance? And they say, well, no, I'm not on food stamps, so I'm not really in that category of, family that would get tuition assistance. So that's the first point I want to make, is that, it's not just for families with very, low income. We have families with, mid-range and, moderate incomes. And again, particularly as there are multiple children that you're enrolling in a school that are on tuition assistance. That is often in Christian schools a part of the mission. That's certainly true here at Washington Christian Academy, just to have an economic diversity that exists within the families that are here. We think that it creates a great community, that's the kind of community, a diverse one, that we want our children to be, brought up in and to be a part of. And we think that benefits the school. That's a part of our fulfilling our mission. We want to be able to serve the widest range of Christian families that we can. And that includes lots of areas of diversity, but certainly economic diversity. So as you're thinking about yourself and might be hesitant to apply for tuition assistance, don't be there. Christian schools want families in that are on tuition assistance. You're not viewed as a stepchild within the community or no particular negative connotation associated with that. You're a valued member of the community. And a part of that too is that many families within typical Christian schools are receiving tuition assistance. And in some cases, our case, I'll be going into some more specifics, but over half of our families receive tuition assistance. So you're not even in the minority. In our case, you're in the majority when you're looking at the community. Now, the last part about that helps schools and motivates them to provide tuition assistance for families is that it's something that they can raise money for. There are people who have resources and at the same time have a heart for Christian education and wanting that economic diversity and wanting to help and support families that don't have resources. And they contribute toward the tuition assistance funds to enable schools to be able to do this. So it's really built in as a part of Christian schools and building that community. So the first thing I would say is you're looking to build that bridge, don't hesitate to whatever school you're looking at or talking to ask them about and pursue the tuition assistance, program. I've never heard of one family that has hesitated when it comes time for college. Are they gonna fill out the FAFSA and apply for grants or scholarships or tuition assistance in college? I've never heard one family hesitant to do that, but I have heard many in primary and secondary school. So please don't hesitate to apply. And that will be a part of being able to build that bridge for you. A next piece that could fall into place are discounts, and this is true for many Christian schools. Some have discounts, right off the top of the tuition for multiple children. As an example, the second child might receive a 10% discount and the third a 20%. There are many schools that do that. Some schools have discounts for a new family, coming to a school. So if it's the first time you're enrolling a child there, they're trying to build their enrollment and increase the number of families they have. And so they offer incentives to new families. And there are some Christian schools that are affiliated with specific churches or denominations, and being a member of that church or a member of that denomination could also qualify you for a discount. So what I would recommend is that you, again, don't hesitate to pursue these things. Ask the school, the admission office. They'll know, details about these things, but certainly don't hesitate to ask. Let's see, with those things falling in place, there are other sources that can help add to that bridge and get you, further the way across if that doesn't do it for you. And there are probably too many to list just in this other sources category. In the 10 years I've been here, there have been lots and lots of unexpected places people have found resources, found extra money to help support, their tuition. One that we see more frequently are extended families and other, close friends of the family. And especially in that family category are grandparents. We have many grandparents that are helping to support the education for their grandchildren. They've lived a life. They know the difference that education can make, not just through those years of school, but in the whole life of that child. And they're, they really have a heart for their grandchildren, and they care. And some of them have the resources to be able to help their grandchildren. That's become more personal for me. Of our 5 children, my oldest is married. We have a granddaughter that's about 1.5 years old, and it's something I've thought about for her, at the point that she reaches kindergarten age. And if my son, I don't know if he's out there listening now, But if he is at that point where he's thinking about, can I afford it? Can I build that bridge? I don't know that I would be able to, but I absolutely, my wife and I would pray about it and, ask if there was something that we could do to help. So that's something that we've seen other families. And then finally, there are churches we've seen support, again, not necessarily denominational affiliations or discounts, but other churches that have supported families. And there are some cases where employers. So I would ask in each of those categories. And, one of the things to think about as you're approaching people or setting it before them, you're not, asking them, just to give you money. It's really looking at an investment in a particular life and in the future difference that investment's going to make. And that's a privilege. That's not just, something that's a burden. And the Lord places that on people's hearts and organizations' hearts, and at times to be able to do that. So I encourage you to ask. The next category is priority adjustments to talk about. We've seen some families as they've thought about Christian education, they've looked at their finances and their budget. They made some changes in their priorities. I wanted to talk about that a little bit more. You can see up on the slide, I have the phrase, don't consider what it's worth, or consider what it's worth, not just, what it costs. We believe that investment I've mentioned, in the life of a child is something that is very, very significant. And when you think about how you're spending your money, what it's being invested in, for me, obviously you need to have shelter and food and clothing, but when I think about my children, something that's been a real high priority for my wife and I has been that investment in them. Think about yourself and all that happened to you from the time that you first entered your first day of kindergarten until the time where you walked across the stage at graduation, high school graduation. Think about, how those years affected you and how much time, you were in school. And in some sense, all of us are either benefiting from what happened to our lives over the course of those years, or we're just recovering from it. So that is a really crucial time in our lives and children's lives, and we think that it is worth a significant investment and is really one of the best investments that you can make. So we have seen families as they thought about that and seeing what being in a Christian school can do and how it can prepare them not just educationally but prepare them for life. Have made some adjustments in their budgets and the things that they've valued or where they've been investing their money. And the last thing I'd like to talk about in this bridge building part is not extending the bridge, but how do you pay for it? Christian schools are often able to structure payment plans in accordance with the family's their resources and their financial patterns. So if it's a fairly even financial pattern, you'll see often 10 or even 12-month payment plans where the tuition is stretched across that time. There are some families in their businesses where that's not the way that their finances happen, and so then often Christian schools can adjust the payment plan to better match the patterns that they have. Again, I would say ask. If you're just thinking, how in the world am I going to come up with that tuition amount before the year starts, that's not going to be the case. You're almost always going to be able to pay it out over time. But again, ask and see what kind of flexibility a school has, and many of them are going to be able to work with you in that.
Yeah, so I just as a quick interlude here, we ran that poll earlier, and it was a 50-50 answer on who pays tuition or doesn't. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of interesting. I just posted another poll question for everyone, and if you can answer that on the sidebar there, you'll see that is what % of tuition would be reasonable for you to pay? So just, you can kind of give some answers there just to kind of get a framework for what you think is reasonable. And as you kind of hear this call and they're processing some of this information. So with that, Dave's going to continue here talking a little bit more about how to afford tuition here at Washington Christian Academy.
All right, let me jump into that specifically. So now I've been trying to keep the conversation general, from what I know about other Christian schools, and now some specifics for us. We are a school that has a significant number of our families, more than half of them, receiving tuition assistance here. And we've got a wonderful community, and that's a part of it, having that, diversity. So everyone that comes through the door, as they, think about attending the school, if the question of tuition comes up or it's raised as a concern, we encourage families to apply for tuition assistance. We do give at our school multi-year awards that are based on need. I'm going to talk about the need first a little bit. We use a third-party service that families put their financial information into, and it gives to us what's called the estimated family contribution, the same kind of number that you get when you do that college FAFSA process. And we don't use it as a formula, that's the end result, but it does help us, as we're looking at the landscape of families that are applying for tuition assistance and our budget and how we're going to be able to best distribute that. So that helps us understand that it doesn't only look at salary. We don't have a particular salary figure either above, you're disqualified, or below, you're guaranteed, because we understand there are lots of other parameters associated with a family's financial picture, home ownership or not, or particularly if a family owns their own business, that makes things complicated. We're also able to work in charitable giving and tithing to church. We don't want that to, we want families to be able to continue to do that and have that reflected in their financial picture back to the school. So that's a part of our award, pattern in how we tie it back to different families' needs. I also want to talk a little bit about multi-year awards. We recognize that as families enroll in a Christian school, in most cases, they're not thinking, well, they're going to be here this year, but where do I want them next year? Where do I want them the year after? They understand that consistency at a school and its education program is important, that their children can make friends and be involved in athletic teams or other things, and are going to want to have some continuity there. So it's not just a single year decision that families are making when they enroll at a school. And we want to help families see not just, oh, that's what the picture is this year, but a longer time frame associated with that. So we actually give 3-year awards, 4 years if a family is starting in 9th grade. That gets them all the way through their high school career here, so that they know, what that tuition assistance award is going to be, and they can make a longer range plan. The question I most frequently asked is, well, how much is my award going to be? What's typical, or what is, how much money am I going to get in the tuition assistance? So what we tell people is very typical for families to get up to 50%. Think about back to that bridge analogy. We're able, in most cases, we're successful in as long as there's a financial need that exists, in building 50% of that bridge, getting families at least halfway across in their tuition. And we do have families that receive more tuition assistance than that. We look at every family, in a case-by-case scenario. We're not able to give every family, to build the whole bridge for them. We're not able to, if a family says, well, I have maybe 10 or 20% of the tuition, we're not in every case able to build the whole rest of the bridge and get them all the way across. But there are some cases where we give, larger tuition assistance awards. But as I said, if you're just interested in what kind of is typical, it would be up to that 50%. I mentioned on an earlier slide that schools can have additional fees that make it even more difficult. We believe we have minimal additional costs. We do have a uniform policy, so there's purchasing new, or we have lots of used uniforms family can have. We have a graduation fee, for 12th graders, but don't have extra athletic or field trip fees or things like that. So there's a little bit more that's a part of it. Again, I encourage you as you're thinking about schools and looking at them to ask that question. And finally, a couple things about our tuition assistance process. We have it running in conjunction with the application process. So as you're filling out the forms and getting teacher recommendations and things like that, at the same time, you can be filling out the tuition assistance application and moving that part of the process along as well. And the last thing I'd like to share about our process is that it is personal and individual. Though we use this third-party service and get information from them, we get to look at every family individually, and we can solicit information if there's questions we have about what's going on as the tuition assistance committee is reviewing a particular family. We have many families that have written, specific, letters or notes to the tuition assistance committee that are passed along. So we really want the process to feel to be a personal process, for each family that applies. And we really have been successful, over the years as families come here. Those families that fit the mission of the school, that value, what we're doing here, we want them here, and we do everything that we can to be able to get families in here. So we still have to pay our teachers. We have to pay the bills. We have to be responsible in that manner. But we're going to be doing all that we can to try to make it work. So now, what would you do next? And I have the first question up there, is it worth my time? And I have that question instead of what I think people might often ask at the beginning of the process. They see the tuition number and they might say, how am I going to do that? How am I going to come up with, that amount of money over the course of the year to pay that tuition? And what I encourage families to do is to ask that question, is it worth my time to just start the process, to find out about the school? I mean, that's a very important part of it. I mean, you see the tuition number, but is this going to be the right kind of school? I need to learn about the educational program. I need to learn about, the spiritual environment there and pursue those things. Is it worth your time to do that? And to ask them those questions about tuition assistance and discounts they have, and worth the time to go through the process to see what the financial picture would actually be, instead of kind of pre-deciding that it wouldn't work. With schools, you'll have the ability to see the whole picture before you have to commit. So you're not going to have to commit to a school without knowing what your tuition assistance, award is going to be. You're not going to be obligated to attend and, pay some tuition amount without knowing what it is. So, so I'd say, is it worth the time to get to that place where you're going to have the full picture, you're going to see it, you're going to understand it, and then be able to make your decision? Many people, as they do that, we've seen over the years, are surprised. They might be a little skeptical at the beginning or not knowing how it could happen. And lo and behold, they go through the process and maybe the tuition assistance award ends up being more than they thought, or other sources show up. And there are ways that we've just seen the Lord provide things, provide resources for Christian education for families that just at the beginning of the process were either reluctant to get involved or just didn't think it was going to happen. So I encourage you. We have had families that have gone through the process, seen it, and decided that they still weren't able to commit to that. But at least at that point, they have an idea of what it would be. And we have had families that have shown up a year or two later, having known that and had something to particularly work for, or maybe it took a little bit longer to get to that place, but it certainly has helped them even if they weren't able to enroll that particular year, it gave them a realistic picture of what it would be. So I would say maybe what not to do next is just to wait, or to wonder. You're going to have to pursue something to find out how much it would be to get to that full picture. So let me see, think through if you're in one of maybe 3 different categories at this particular point. Maybe you've done some investigation of Christian schools, and maybe that's been WCA. You've looked at our website. You've talked to other families, that have attended here. This tuition assistance, the amount of the tuition has held you up before. So the next step is to come to the school, to visit us, to talk to us, to allow us to talk with you and get an idea of first, again, if the school is the right place for your student, if our mission here fits what you want for your children, but also give us an opportunity to find out how much of that bridge we can build and to see if we can get you across that bridge. So we've got open houses scheduled each month. If that isn't convenient, we have individual tours that we run. We'd love to have you here at the school, tell you about it, and start to walk through this process with you. If you haven't done that research, you're just starting to think about it, I encourage you to spend time on school websites. We've got a significant amount of information on ours about our program, about what we're trying to accomplish here, our missions. You can learn a lot online from different schools. We have some resources on ours that you can either look at, some videos where we have some of our students talking about how the education here at WCA has affected them. We also have some content you can download. So spend some time on the website, learning more, doing your research. Or maybe you're someone kind of in between. You've done some research, you've had some questions, you're not ready to come visit yet. Just give us a call, or call the school that you're interested in. Get answered a couple questions. You can find out a lot just talking to someone on the phone. Share, some about your child and the needs that they have, and I'm sure the school would be excited to be able to have a conversation with you and share a little bit more about their mission and what they're interested in. So I think at the end of this, I would say, way back to the beginning, the people that hesitated because they thought this was going to be a roadblock, many that went ahead with it have discovered that, what they thought, and the Lord has done things to enable people to attend. So that's the information I had to share about our specific program and just building that bridge in general. I appreciate your waiting through the delay at the beginning to get to this. I'm going to turn it back over to Ralph now and see if there are some questions that we can answer.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That was very helpful. I think there's a lot of very pertinent information for everyone to process and think through. We know this is an important decision. So is there any questions you have? If you can ask them in the chat panel here, I'll ask them of David. I have one here that came in as a question is financial aid only for poor and needy people?
Right. So I think if you've been listening through what I said earlier, I've got an emphatic no. It's not just for families that are on food stamps. And of all the things I've hoped that you've gotten, through this, I would want that to be the thing you take away, more. Apply for tuition assistance. And again, we encourage families to do that, all families.
Yeah, and kind of another question here is kind of tied to the poll question. Is can you give an example of a middle-class family like mine who makes a middle-class salary? We have 3 kids. We would love to enroll here. What % could they expect to get in financial aid? And what are what are some of the, just kind of as a general frame? I think they're asking more for like a range or just a general thing. I know you kind of had some content you mentioned in that. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes.
I think it's more some of multiple children is kind
right.
of with a family size.
Right. So I mentioned on the slide earlier, our typical awards are up to 50%. Certainly when we're not a school that has a specific discount for multiple children. So we don't have, that 10% off for the second one or 20% off. But what we tell families is that just works itself out within the tuition assistance process. So as you have a second child, or in this example, a third child, that's 3 tuitions. So that's a significant amount, more that a family has to pay. And so, when it works itself through that third-party service, I talked about, the expected family contribution, is, reduces for each student, that's added. And that's absolutely something that we take into account. We want to serve families, not just families with 1 child, but families with 2 or 3, or even like mine with 5. I don't think we have a family here right now with 4 children. I have 3 of my children here. We have several families with 3 children, many with 2, and at least 1 or a few with 4. So we do have, families with multiple children. So what that means in terms of the percentage or the range you would expect, we would go, we go typically above that 50%, up to 60%, for families, and again, in some cases beyond that. So multiple children definitely is something that would be a part of increasing what you would expect, how much of that bridge we're going to be able to build. For each of those children, maybe that's a way to think about my analogy. You're not just building 1 bridge, you got to build 3 of them. So we're going to be able to build more of it for you.
Here's a question. Do you have a position on whether it is appropriate to spend more than income in order to afford tuition?
More than your income? Let me...
I guess going into debt.
Right, going into debt for that.
Yeah.
So I think that, that's any opinion I would have would be a personal opinion. So as a school, we don't have a formal opinion on that. I think that that's something that each family has to look at particularly and decide. I mean, in general, we don't encourage debt. We don't allow families to kind of hold debt over multiple years and be building up this, large burden of debt, and in some cases, if we see that happening with families, we know that, that's not helping them. So we don't have any, rule or policy associated with that. But certainly what I would say is each family has to decide what is going to be a burden or not, and it shouldn't be something that takes the family down.
As a side note, just as something out there, have you guys ever referred or had people use loans just like you would in college for tuition? I know there's some organizations out there. Do you have families that use that?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, we don't, there's not, like, colleges typically work with financial organizations, in that loan process. So we don't have a financial organization that we work with that we would get that information. I'm sure there are times, particularly when, as families' finances kind of ebb and flow, at times there have been families that have done that. I think it would be a harder situation, again, be that kind of a burden on a family if it was something that they had to sustain. They had to keep taking out, more and more loans, and that's just going to be this huge burden that is going to be, too hard for them to get out from underneath.
Great. Well, that's all our questions. Just to kind of remind everyone, if you want to contact David and you have some specific situation you want to run by him, you can call on the phone number here on the website information, and also you have Dave's email right here. So we'll be also publishing this shortly here, so you can watch it again and have a replay email sent out to you. We thank you for your time, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you again for coming to our workshop.
Yep, thanks so much. And again, we appreciate your patience with us. God bless you. Bye-bye.